It was a cold, crisp autumn evening in the village of Glenford, nestled in the hills of Northern Ireland. The kind of evening where the fog clung to the ground like a thick blanket, blurring the line between the present and the past. The local pub was filled with the usual chatter, but across town, something ominous was beginning to unfold. Inside a small stone cottage, tucked away on the edge of the village, Hannah and Liam Murphy had finished their dinner. It had been a quiet evening, the last normal evening they'd have for the rest of their lives. Liam, a mechanic in his early 30s, was working on his truck, and Hannah, a teacher at the local primary school, was preparing for the next day. Their routine was simple, their life peaceful. No signs pointed to the tragedy that would strike them out of the blue. As the clock struck midnight, something went horribly wrong. Hannah and Liam Murphy were the kind of couple everyone admired. They had moved to Glenford a few years before, leaving the bustle of Belfast behind for a quieter life. In their early 30s, they had no children but were beloved by their neighbors for their kindness and generosity. They had known each other since childhood, having grown up in nearby villages. Hannah, with her curly brown hair and bright, engaging smile, was the sort of person who always made everyone around her feel at ease. Liam, on the other hand, was the quieter, reserved type, an easygoing man with a dry sense of humor. They were partners in life and shared an unshakable bond. They had no known enemies. They weren't involved in any dangerous activities, and from all accounts, everything in their lives seemed to be running smoothly. There were no obvious signs of distress, no troubling arguments, no sudden financial troubles, no hints of a hidden past. But that peaceful evening would soon be shattered. The morning after their disappearance, a strange calm settled over the village of Glenford. It was as if the air had thickened with anticipation, though no one could quite put their finger on it. The sun rose over the hills, casting long shadows across the village, but still, no sign of the Murphys. Their friends grew concerned when they didn't show up for their regular coffee meetup at the local bakery. Hannah's phone went straight to voicemail. Liam's work truck had been abandoned outside their home, but there were no signs of struggle. A neighbor, Marie, called the police after noticing the truck was still there by the time evening rolled in. "I haven't seen them all day," Marie said to the officer on the phone, her voice trembling. "I went over to check on them. No answer. The door's unlocked, but everything's still inside. It's like they just vanished." Detective John Carver of the Glenford Police Department was one of the first to arrive at the Murphys' cottage. He stepped into the small living room and took in the scene, his mind immediately going into overdrive. There were no signs of forced entry. Their belongings, phones, keys, and wallets were all left behind. There were no bloodstains, no signs of violence. The investigation started with the basics, checking the couple's recent movements, asking neighbors about anything unusual, and looking through their financial and social media history. But no one could pinpoint anything that seemed out of the ordinary. When John visited the local pub where Liam often went after work, he found that no one had seen him the evening of his disappearance. Not even his closest friends could recall anything suspicious. Hannah's colleagues at the school also had no answers. She had been planning lessons as usual. It wasn't until a forensic team arrived to search the property that something strange was uncovered. A single, faint trace of blood was found near the back door. It was barely visible to the naked eye, but when tested, it matched the DNA of Liam Murphy. This new revelation changed everything. The investigation took a darker turn when forensic experts revealed the blood trail. The question wasn't just where they had gone, it was what had happened to them. The faint traces led from the back of the house toward the woods at the edge of their property. The team scoured the area for days, but there was no sign of the couple. Months passed, and the investigation seemed to stall. Every lead turned cold. As the search continued, theories started to circulate among the townspeople. Some believed they had run off together, perhaps starting a new life elsewhere, Others, however, feared foul play. Someone had to have been involved, but who? Theories about a robbery gone wrong, a random abduction, or even a domestic dispute began to fill the air. A few people speculated that Liam had been in trouble with some shady characters, but no one could provide any concrete evidence. Still, Detective Carver couldn't shake the feeling that something was being hidden. There was no way a couple so well liked with no apparent enemies could just vanish into thin air without a trace. And then one day, a breakthrough. A woman came forward. Her name was Linda, and she claimed she'd been out walking her dog near the woods the night of the disappearance. She told the police that she had seen someone in the shadows, near the back of the Murphy property. She couldn't see their face clearly, but she thought it might have been a man. "How can I be sure?" she said, voice quivering. It was dark, but there was something about the way he was standing. It just didn't sit right with me. And then I heard voices, a low argument. I couldn't make out the words, but I knew something was wrong. Detective Carver was intrigued. Could this be the break they'd been waiting for? But there was more. A few days later, another witness came forward. A man who claimed to have seen Liam and Hannah the night they disappeared, at the local market. But there was a twist in his story. The fog had settled heavily on Glenford that evening, giving the village an eerie sense of isolation. The streets were quiet, but the weight of the unsolved mystery of Hannah and Liam Murphy's disappearance was palpable, hanging in the air like a thick cloud. Detective John Carver sat in his office, staring at the witness statement from Linda, the woman who claimed to have seen a man near the Murphys' house on the night they disappeared. The pieces were starting to come together. At least, that's what he thought. But there was one problem. Linda had been walking her dog in the woods around the time Hannah and Liam vanished, yet her description of the figure was vague. She couldn't recall the person's face or anything particularly distinguishing about them. Was it even relevant? Was she just another concerned citizen overreacting? Or was there something more to her account? And then came the second witness. Darren, the man who had claimed to have seen the couple at the market just hours before their disappearance. Darren wasn't well known in the village. He was a loner, someone who kept to himself. Still, when he'd come forward, his information seemed almost too convenient. Had Darren seen something crucial? Or was he trying to insert himself into the investigation? The more Carver dug, the deeper the rabbit hole seemed to go. The Murphys, despite their friendly exterior, had secrets. Carver had spoken to their neighbors, and while most acclaimed they were a model couple, one detail stood out to him. A man named Carl, Liam's old friend from Belfast, had reportedly been in town a few weeks before the couple disappeared. Carl wasn't exactly a beloved figure in Glenford. He had a reputation for being involved in shady dealings, and he didn't seem to mind showing it. He was known for a history of minor run-ins with the law, mostly centered around theft and fraud. Detective Carver's instincts told him that Carl might know more than he was letting on. But every lead tied to Carl came up empty. No one had seen him recently. His phone records showed no significant communication with Liam or Hannah, but his name kept resurfacing in witness statements, like an unwanted ghost lurking in the background. After reviewing the new witness testimony, Carver focused on the timeline again. The last known sighting of Hannah and Liam was in the early evening at the village market, just a few hours before their disappearance. Darren, the lone man who'd stepped forward, claimed he saw them laughing and carrying bags of groceries. "Normal evening," Darren had said. "Nothing out of the ordinary, just the two of them strolling like any other couple." But what happened after that? The couple's phones had been turned off just hours later. There was no sign of forced entry into their home. No messages, no last-minute calls, nothing that would suggest they were in danger. Then, a new piece of information surfaced. A letter. It had been sent to the local post office just 2 days before their disappearance. The envelope was addressed to the village council, but there was something odd about the return address. It was a postmark from a remote location near Belfast, hundreds of miles away. The letter itself was brief but chilling. It stated, "The Murphys are being watched. They know too much." The discovery of the letter sent ripples through the investigation. Who had sent it? And more importantly, why had it been addressed to the council? Carver's first thought was that the letter was a warning, something meant to send a clear message that the Murphys were involved in something far bigger than a simple disappearance. But what could they possibly have known? The more Carver investigated, the more the village of Glenford seemed to be shrouded in secrecy. While the Murphys' immediate circle appeared harmless, the deeper he dug, the more he found signs of a community with hidden fractures. Local businesses, including the small corner shop where Hannah sometimes did her shopping, were frequently visited by strangers with no clear ties to the village. And then there were rumors of a land deal that had gone sour, a dispute over property near the Murphys' home that had made waves in the small community. Detective Carver soon realized that this was no ordinary case. This wasn't just about the disappearance of a couple, it was about uncovering the truth behind a web of lies that had been carefully woven over the years. The theories started to fly in every direction. Some speculated that the Murphys had run off, possibly to start a new life. The absence of any real violence or signs of struggle made it plausible, but Carver couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to it. Others believed they had been taken by someone, possibly even Carl, Liam's old friend. But if that were true, why hadn't the police found any solid evidence to tie him to the crime? And then there was the possibility that they had become victims of something much larger, perhaps a dangerous organization that had been operating in the background, pulling strings in the small village of Glenford. The breakthrough came unexpectedly. A surveillance camera in the village square, not far from the market where Hannah and Liam had been seen, had captured something chilling. The footage showed a man walking down the street, his face partially obscured by a hood. He glanced around nervously before walking into a narrow alleyway just moments after the Murphys had left the market. But here was the most shocking part. The man seemed to be carrying something heavy, something that appeared to be wrapped in cloth. Carver couldn't believe what he was seeing. Could this be the same man that Linda had seen in the woods that night? Was this the person who had taken Hannah and Liam? And if so, why had they been carrying something so heavy? It was a quiet morning in Glenford, but the calmness was deceptive. Detective Carver sat in the dimly lit room of the police station, staring at the grainy surveillance footage. The hooded figure walking down the alley, carrying the wrapped object, haunted him. What was in that cloth? And why was it so important that the person had been so careful in hiding it from view? The footage had been a breakthrough, a vital clue in the case, but now Carver was left with more questions than answers. The alleyway was known to be a shortcut to a secluded part of the village, one that few people ventured into, making it a perfect place for something sinister to happen without being noticed. But the mystery was far from over. As the investigation unfolded, more details came to light. The wrapped object seen in the video continued to gnaw at Carver's mind. Was it the Murphys' belongings? Had they been forced to leave with only what they could carry? Or was there a darker, more malicious motive at play? The footage had shown the mysterious man entering the alley with the bundle, but it hadn't followed his movements after that. Was he meeting someone? Or was he disposing of something altogether more incriminating? After a week of intensive analysis, Carver and his team managed to trace the origins of the wrapped object. It turned out that it had been found discarded near the woods, just a few miles from the Murphys' home, a place that had already been searched multiple times. Upon closer inspection, the object appeared to be an item of clothing: dark jeans, a t-shirt, and a jacket. It was covered in dirt, and there were faint traces of blood on the fabric. But whose blood was it? The blood was not a perfect match to either Hannah or Liam, but it did belong to someone close to them. And that was where the investigation took a chilling turn. The blood on the clothing was traced back to Carl, the man who had been linked to Liam in the weeks before the couple's disappearance. Carl had denied any involvement in their vanishing, but now his past connections with the Murphys were being scrutinized under a new light. Carl's alibi for the evening of the disappearance had seemed solid at first. He claimed to have been at home, watching a football match. But Carver knew something wasn't right. People in the village had reported seeing Carl lurking near the Murphys' property, long after they were last seen. And when questioned, Carl had become defensive, even hostile, a stark contrast to his usual demeanor. But Carl wasn't the only one with a hidden past. Carver began to dig deeper into the land. Dispute that had surfaced in the earlier investigation. The property near the Murphys' home had been the subject of a bitter feud involving a wealthy developer, a man named George Clayton, who had tried to buy the land from the Murphys. The deal had fallen through at the last minute, but there was something off about Clayton's refusal to leave the village quietly. Neighbors recalled seeing Clayton arguing with Liam just days before their disappearance. He had been furious about the deal falling apart, and there were whispers that Clayton had a history of getting what he wanted, by any means necessary. But what connection did he have to the wrapped clothing? And why had it been hidden in the woods, so far from the scene? Theories about what had happened to the Murphys began to evolve, and every new piece of evidence seemed to suggest that there was something more to the situation than anyone had anticipated. It wasn't just a simple case of a couple vanishing without a trace. It was becoming clear that Hannah and Liam had been caught in a web of secrets and lies, entangled with people they thought they could trust. Carver now had two possible suspects: Carl, whose blood had been found on the clothing, and George Clayton, whose argument with Liam just days before had set alarm bells ringing. But which one of them, or perhaps both, was behind the disappearance? And how were they connected? Just as Carver was about to focus his attention fully on Carl, a call came through from the forensics lab. They had found something else, a crucial detail that had been overlooked in the initial investigation. The DNA found on the clothing wasn't just a match for Carl's blood. It was a mix of both Carl's and another person's. Carver's heart raced as he listened to the lab technician's voice on the other end of the line. "That's not all," the technician continued. "There's a third sample. We're still running tests, but it seems to be connected to someone else from the village." Who could this third person be? And what did they have to do with the Murphys' disappearance? The investigation was unraveling in ways Carver never expected. Could there be a third player involved? And if so, what role did they play in this sinister puzzle? The fog that had blanketed Glenford for weeks finally began to lift. But what Detective Carver was about to uncover was more chilling than the cold that had descended over the village. The phone call from the lab had changed everything. There was a third person's DNA on the clothing found near the woods, and now the investigation was about to take a terrifying turn. The identity of this third person had remained hidden for weeks, but that would change today. Carver stared at the DNA report in his hands, the words staring back at him like a final piece of a puzzle, waiting to reveal the full picture. The name that appeared on the report was one that shook him to his core. It was the name of someone who had been living in plain sight, someone who had slipped under the radar, unnoticed by everyone, including the Murphys. The DNA matched the profile of a local, a man named Patrick O'Neill, a seemingly quiet, unassuming individual in his late 40s. He had lived in Glenford for several years, keeping mostly to himself. His job at the village hardware store made him a fixture in the community, but no one suspected him of anything more than a simple, reclusive life. But Patrick had more ties to the Murphys than anyone realized. It turned out that Patrick had been working for Liam on a few home repair projects, helping him with the property's maintenance. He had been a regular visitor at their home in the weeks leading up to their disappearance, and according to new statements from neighbors, Patrick had been seen having frequent, heated arguments with Liam over the property's maintenance costs. Detective Carver's mind raced. Was this the key piece of the puzzle? Had Patrick grown angry at the Murphys over money, or was there something deeper at play? The breakthrough came when Carver and his team questioned Patrick in greater detail. Initially, Patrick denied any involvement in the couple's disappearance, offering a carefully rehearsed alibi. He claimed to have been home, alone, the night of their disappearance. But the more they probed, the more cracks appeared in his story. A friend of Patrick's, who had previously kept quiet, came forward with a confession. Patrick had spoken of his frustrations with Liam during a late-night conversation just a few days before the Murphys vanished. He had mentioned something about teaching him a lesson regarding the land dispute and the repairs he was never paid for. But what had happened after that conversation? Had Patrick's anger led to something far more sinister? Then came the shocking revelation that tied it all together. Forensic evidence uncovered an imprint of Patrick's shoe near the spot where the clothing had been found. It matched the exact type of footwear Patrick was known to wear. The pieces were falling into place. Patrick O'Neill had been more than just a frustrated worker. He had harbored resentment that festered into something much darker. But the most chilling detail of all was what he had said when confronted. "I didn't mean for it to happen that way," Patrick admitted, his voice cracking under the pressure. "It was supposed to be a scare, just a way to make Liam listen." But they got out of control. The implications of his words were horrifying. Patrick hadn't just been angry at the Murphys for the unfinished repairs, he had been involved in their disappearance, and the argument had escalated into something far more violent. The arrest of Patrick O'Neill sent shockwaves through the village. What had once been a community known for its peace and quiet now found itself facing the unthinkable. A betrayal from within. The Murphys had been victims not of a random crime, but of a calculated, simmering resentment that had turned deadly. As the case moved to trial, the true scope of Patrick's involvement came to light. He had not acted alone, though. It was discovered that George Clayton, the wealthy developer who had been in a bitter dispute with Liam over the land deal, had paid Patrick to intimidate the couple into selling the land. Clayton had used Patrick as an intermediary, believing that fear and pressure would make Liam give in to his demands. But when Patrick had escalated the situation beyond control, the tragedy unfolded. Patrick's initial plan to simply scare Liam had turned into something far worse, and in the heat of the moment, both Liam and Hannah had been taken and never returned. Patrick O'Neill was sentenced to life in prison for his role in the kidnapping and murder of the Murphys, while George Clayton was arrested for conspiracy to commit murder and manipulation. As the dust settled, the village of Glenford struggled to come to terms with the fact that the person they had trusted, the man who had been a part of their daily lives, was capable of such dark acts. The shock rippled through the community, leaving behind a trail of broken trust and grief. This case was a sobering reminder that sometimes the darkest secrets are hidden in the most familiar faces, and in the quiet corners of our communities, it's easy to overlook the simmering tensions that can explode into violence. The tragic deaths of Hannah and Liam Murphy left an indelible mark on Glenford, and their story serves as a cautionary tale, one that teaches us to look closer, listen more carefully, and trust our instincts when something doesn't feel right. The disappearance of Hannah and Liam Murphy may have seemed like an isolated event at first, but it's a reminder that sometimes, even in the quietest places, danger can be lurking just beneath the surface. How well do we really know the people around us? And how often do we ignore the signs of simmering conflict until it's too late? What do you think about the case of the Murphys? Was justice truly served, or are there still unanswered questions? Leave your thoughts and theories in the comments below. What do you think happened to them? And don't forget to subscribe for more chilling true crime stories that reveal the hidden truths of the world we thought we knew.